Located 30 miles off the shores of Charlevoix, Beaver Island is part of an archipelago in Lake Michigan. The island is only about 13 miles long, but is brimming with wildlife and has a small, year-round population. It is a perfect spot for escaping the hectic rush of everyday modern life.
It's a quiet place, and you can live with the old times instead of the modern times in the city. I think that brings a lot of people there just to see what it's like.
The idea of finding paradise is not new to the shores of Beaver Island. In the 1850s, Beaver Island was the location of America's only legal monarchy. The self-proclaimed king, James Jesse Strang, settled his group of Mormon followers on Beaver Island in order to escape the harassment bestowed upon the Mormons. However, Strang's reign on Beaver Island was anything but typical. The story of King James Strang is one that includes greed, deception, passionate love, polygamy, piracy, and, of course, murder.
He obviously had strong moral conviction. He was also a man with a vision and what he wanted. How ruthless he was in order to get it, I've only heard rumors. But he obviously was hardworking, he was industrious, he was bright, and he was determined.
In Nauvoo, Illinois, February 1844, James Jesse Strang became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Founder of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith, accepted James with open arms, and soon Strang became an integral part of the church. When Joseph Smith was assassinated in June of 1844, there became a power struggle as to who would lead the Mormon Church. Although other leaders were considered, the battle for authority was primarily between James Strang and Brigham Young. But Strang had delusions of grandeur.
So he was a brilliant man, and he was a paradox in many ways. He had written as a young man. He had a dream of marrying the Queen of England. Now, that would make us scoff or laugh, but he had these ambitions.
Strang produced a questionable letter from Joseph Smith after his death, which entitled him to be the leader of the church. His argument was found invalid, and James was excommunicated. Strang and his Strangite followers moved from Illinois to Wisconsin and finally settled in June of 1848 on Beaver Island, Michigan, the perfect, isolated spot for Strang to build his kingdom.
King Strang ended up coming to the island because he was looking for a place of isolation where his followers wouldn't be persecuted. So in some of his travels up and down Lake Michigan, he was able to come across this island. And then when he was in Wisconsin with some of the people that he was converting, he told them about his vision. Now, it wasn't necessarily a vision because he had just traveled by here 3 weeks before and saw this magnificent harbor, fishing grounds that were extremely bountiful. We had timber and hardwoods that were unbelievable. So what a perfect spot to get your group away from mainlanders and make a settlement.
Taking responsibility for his Mormon community very seriously, James was adamant about criticizing materialism, alcohol, and sexual immorality. Contrary to Brigham Young, Strang also condemned the practice of polygamy.
He had certainly some good points, and he had some bad points. He was human after all, not the great spiritual leader that he would have had his followers think.
The object of Strang's affection came to be a 19-year-old girl named Elvira Field, and they fell deeply in love. After being confronted about their affections for each other, Elvira agreed to secretly marry James as his second wife in 1849. Consistent with church doctrine, it would be inappropriate for a young, unwed girl to travel about with a religious gentleman. Strang decided that Elvira would masquerade as his nephew, Charles Douglas.
He would go out proselytizing back to New York and all over the Great Lakes region, go by boat from port to port, preaching, to get more recruits. So he took this Elvira Field with him and had her dressed as a boy and passed her off as his nephew, Charlie.
Eventually, however, the figure of Charles Douglas began to raise eyebrows among Strang's followers.
It would be too much to continue the deception on Beaver Island when everybody was in such close proximity. So he revealed that God had said to him, James, take more women into your lives. And this started a schism within the Mormon community. Some people thought, well, that's awfully convenient. And other people thought, well, God talks in mysterious ways, and we've trusted our prophet so far, we'll trust him on this.
During his reign on Beaver Island, James Strang married 5 wives and had 14 children, his youngest wife being the same age as his eldest daughter. On July 8, 1850, Strang held a coronation where, by the authority of God, he proclaimed himself King James Strang, the King of the Kingdom of God on earth.
There was abuse of power, so he didn't separate church from state, and he ended up being rather abusive to his people and to the other people in northern Michigan.
Prior to Strang's arrival in June of 1848, the island inhabitants included a small population comprised of Native Americans and Western European settlers. Initially, an amicable working relationship existed between the Mormons and the Gentiles.
By 1850, actually, he had the greater number of people on the island and became the dominant force. And he proceeded to impose his version of Mormon law, which meant tithing. Everybody who lived here, he said, had to contribute 10% of their income to him for the right to live under his protection.
Anyone who refused to pay 1/10 of their annual income was either beaten or publicly whipped and humiliated.
There are multiple stories about King Strang's reign on the island. Some people would view him as a villain, and they talk about him even shipwrecking ships on a shallow area, putting lights, and a ship may come too close and go aground, and then they could take whatever provisions were on the boat. But there was probably another side to him. Those people had to be very industrious coming out here to the island. They had a network of roads, which, cutting into a virgin forest must have been a lot of work. They ended up opening up areas that were heavily forested and making farms. They supplied at least 30 ships coming by here with hardwoods. And he was also probably an early environmentalist.
He also constructed a print shop and founded The Northern Islander, a newspaper where Strang promoted and reinforced his rule.
He wanted the people to read what he wanted them to read, so it was slanted news.
The ill-treated Gentiles were growing weary of church doctrine. Not only was Strang forcibly taking their resources for his own, He stopped the whiskey trade in the area and forced all people on Beaver Island to follow the rules of the church. A group of furious Gentile rebels soon banded together, rallying for revenge at the trading post. When the retort of cannon fire blasted through the center of the angry mob, it echoed of forthcoming events. Strang would now stop at nothing to gain complete control. The Gentiles either succumbed to his rule or moved away. The land and people of Beaver Island were now completely under the control of King James Jesse Strang. News of this had reached the White House. President Millard Fillmore sent the U.S. Marshal and the district attorney to tend to the Michigan Mormon trouble. In June of 1851, Strang and a number of his followers were indicted by the federal court in Detroit. Strang, already a skilled orator, was educated as a lawyer prior to converting to Mormonism. Strang defended his own case in the federal court and prevailed. He returned to his flock on Beaver Island, legally and officially as king.
He saw that his, you might say, crazy ideas were more or less accepted, and so his ideas got crazier and crazier.
Strang was wily enough and smart, very smart man, and was able to always, in fact, he was in the legislature in Lansing, got himself elected because Beaver Island had a large enough population to vote him in. But I think his people saw behind that what a conniver he was. If someone disagreed with him, they would be subject to whippings, so to speak, as was my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Bedford.
They were ruled rather strictly by King Strang. And he was smart enough to know how far he should go, but he went too far, evidently, with the bloomers.
Apparently, King Strang found women's fashion to be under his jurisdiction and mandated that all women wear bloomers.
The woman that started that fashion, her name was Amelia Bloomers, and they came down below the knee and were very full and ugly. And he decreed that the women should all wear them.
Some of the women thought, well, this is fine, that makes sense, I'll wear bloomers. But others thought, he's got no business telling us how to live our lives. That's outside of religion, and I'm not going to do it. And Bedford's wife was the main proponent of the anti-bloomer movement, and she went to her friends and said, we can't allow Strang to have this much power. We've got to not wear bloomers. And he heard about this, and he went to Bedford, and he said, control your wife, and Bedford couldn't. And so Bedford was publicly whipped. And as a result, he swore to his cronies that he would kill Strang.
I personally don't think it was because of the bloomers. There's another aspect to this. I guess, again, this is hearsay, but it is written in the history that Thomas was caught by Strang having an affair with another man's wife. He was ordered to be whipped. I've heard 39 times, I've heard 79 whippings. And after that whipping, he vowed to take vengeance in front of the crowd. He vowed to take vengeance on Strang.
Much like Bedford, Dr. Hezekiah McCulloch also despised Strang's rise to power. He conspired to assassinate James Strang with Thomas Bedford and another disgruntled follower, Alexander Wentworth.
The pistols, one was a horse pistol and the other was just a regular handgun, and they were procured by the doctor, I'd heard. Dr. McCulloch got those, and I think it was all set up, the murder, the assassination of Jesse James Strang, probably by the government.
On June 16, 1856, King Strang was summoned to the docks. Upon his arrival, Bedford and Wentworth sprang out and shot Strang and proceeded to pistol whip him as he lay mortally wounded. It may not have been coincidental that the U.S. naval ship, the USS Michigan, was in the harbor at the time of Strang's shooting. Bedford and Wentworth sought refuge aboard the Michigan and were taken to Mackinac Island for a mock trial. Bedford and Wentworth were each charged a small fine for their crimes, released, and celebrated as heroes.
Strang was wrong in a lot of things he did, but for him to be treated in that manner and then only a 50-cent fine, that was a gross injustice.
Strang, due to his injuries, was no longer able to rule his people. He retreated to Voorhees, Wisconsin, where he died 3 weeks later on July 9, 1856. And unfortunately for the Strangite followers, King Strang left no successor. Without a shepherd, his flock remained helpless when the Gentiles banded together and regained control of the island. The Gentiles stripped the Mormons of their possessions as payment for their struggles, and the Strangites were relocated to various locales on the Great Lakes. Soon after the Mormon community was banished from its shores, Beaver Island became a safe haven for the Irish escaping the potato famine.
Those people just walked into a ready-made town, ready-made farms. The King's Highway was there in the offshoots. The docks were there. With all they had to do was keep cutting more wood in the winter to sell to the passing steamers. So for those that came behind Strang, they really had it made.
Although the Irish influence remains a strong one, the 1850s changed Beaver Island forever, and the fingerprints of James Strang continue to resonate on the island. Incredibly enough, the events on Beaver Island during King Strang's reign occurred only over a brief 8-year period.
I think he deserves a lot of credit. He was before my time, but he done a lot for the island in one sense of the word to get people to come here, or else maybe they wouldn't be here yet.
The story of King Strang is an enigmatic part of Beaver Island's history, and it persuades curious visitors to travel to its shores.
I think he's a very interesting man, though. The more you think about what he tried to accomplish out here and his vision for controlling people, there's more to it than just a tyrant.